The rise of Macedonia. After the Peloponnesian War, Macedonia took over Greece. They were led by Philip II and his son Alexander. What you need to understand is that the way that they took over Greece is that they used the phalanx, which is an example of cultural diffusion because if you remember the phalanx, if you watched the clip of 300, was used by the Greeks originally. They also used the pike. What you need to understand and give you the background here is that the Greeks looked at Macedonia previously as backwards because they lived in villages instead of cities. Philip II took over. He reorganized the military using the Greek style of phalanx and gave his soldier a longer spear. If you look in the pictures here, you can see that their spears are way longer, and they called it a pike. Now, when we talk about Alexander, what you need to understand is that at the age of 20, he took over. Okay, his father's murdered at a wedding, his sister's wedding, actually. So he gets murdered. And Alexander the Great is a very intelligent man. When we talk about Alexander the Great going through these villages, men admired him and wanted to be him, and women wanted to be with him. He had a great military career. He was very strong in battle. He could lead successful cavalries and charge against other armies. And what's going to happen is that Alexander, when he does take over to assert his dominance, he's going to put down any signs of rebellion. Why do we put down a rebellion? So that no one can overtake your empire or your organization. So he's going to go ahead and eliminate anybody from the start. One thing that he's going to do, sorry, I skipped forward by accident, is that he's going to decide to go after Persia. One thing that you need to understand is that in 335 BC, Alexander's going to take 35,000 soldiers and he's going to lead them to Aetolia. And he's going to decide that he's going to go after the king of Persia, which is Darius III. Darius sends 40,000 men to fight against Alexander's 35,000, but unfortunately they catch the L, which means they lose. The two forces meet on the Gracious River, and Alexander's going to win. What's going to happen is that this win for Alexander is going to alarm Darius III. It's going to freak him out. And he vows that he will crush the Macedonians after this. But what you need to understand is that Alexander is going to conquer the entire Persian Empire. Like Darius is like, all right, you won. You can take some of it, and let's call it a truce. And Alexander's like, no, I want the whole thing. Like, we will crush you. And he's going to conquer the empire, but after a couple of battles, like Darius is not going to give this up willingly. He's going to fight and continue to go against Alexander, but ultimately Alexander will take over the complete Persian Empire. And when we talk about the Persians going against the Macedonians, because Darius and Alexander are constantly meeting in battle, the Persians will eventually be spread too thin to where they can no longer fight against Alexander. That's kind of how he gets the W's. He kind of breaks them down. Now, when we talk about Egypt, Alexander's going to march into Egypt in 332 BC, and the Egyptians are going to welcome Alexander. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, welcome Alexander, we're embracing him. And they kind of see him as a liberator, which a liberator means like to be free or to be liberated. He gets named the Pharaoh. And he's going to found his new capital city, Alexandria, which, if you don't notice there's the root word Alex after Alexander. And it will ultimately be the cultural capital of the world. When we talk about Alexander, ultimately, pretty much Alexander is going to be the unchallenged ruler of Southwest Asia, okay? He's going to leave Egypt. He's going to move east into Mesopotamia. He's going to assemble armies. And he's going to be more interested in expanding his empire. He wants to expand it, but he doesn't want to necessarily govern it or control it. And he's going to even pursue heading to India. So when we talk about him moving west, and as you can see on the map here, all these, the red paths here and all this area, this is India. Mesopotamia and all these areas are headed more back towards the west. So by 327 BCE, Alexander and his army reach and cross into the Indus Valley. What you need to understand is that the Indian armies are not going to want Alexander to take over India. So they resist. And he has to defeat this fierce Indian army who used 200 war elephants to block their path. Now, what's going to happen, though, is that even though they are going to get this victory, Alexander's men, they'll march about 200 miles into the Indus River Valley, but then they will turn back. It's a costly win. There's a lot of lives that are lost. They haven't dealt with war elephants before. It's an overwhelming experience, and as you can see, the effect is going to be low morale. These men are going to be discouraged. They're going to want to go home. They do not want to continue to spread this empire. Alexander wants to continue. He wants to keep going. This man wants to be the king of the world. And Alexander wants to keep going, but his men refuse. So if you look here, this map, you can see Alexander's empire and how vast it is. You have areas in here's Egypt down here, Mesopotamia. You're getting all the way across over here to India. These are all the Middle Eastern countries. And then you have Greece. And later this will be the Ottoman Empire. But all of these areas right here. Okay. Now, when we talk about Alexander, he is going to return to Babylon in 323 BC. He wanted to unify and govern his empire. Guys, he wants to construct new cities, roads, and harbors, and he also wants to conquer Arabia. But his plans never came to pass. Unfortunately, which is kind of wild because his name is Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great will eventually catch a fever, and he dies 11 days after returning home to Babylon. He died just a month short of his 33rd birthday. So I'm going to show you this video on the death of Alexander the Great.
If adventure is in you, then Travelodge is for you. Book your 2-night zoocation at Travelodge.com and get 2 free kids passes to the zoo. Travelodge. Stay close to adventure.
Ancient accounts say that for more than 400 years, Alexander the Great's body was preserved and revered in a great tomb in the Egyptian city that he founded, Alexandria. But at the end of the 4th century AD, a series of religious revolutions rocked Egypt. First, the Christian faith dominated, then Islam. The cult of Alexander was driven underground. His great tomb was forgotten or torn down, leaving no clue as to the whereabouts of his body.
I think one of the real possibilities was that he was protected by people who still believed in the old religion, the old Greco-Roman pagan religion.
Many scholars have come to believe that the time came when Alexander's body was transported to a place of safety. Dr. Zahi Hawass has followed the trail to the Bahariya Oasis, 200 miles from Alexandria. Here in 1996, a donkey belonging to a member of his team literally stumbled upon one of the greatest finds in Egyptology. Excavations soon revealed this area to be a cemetery. Some of the burials so rich that this place is now known as the Valley of the Golden Mummies. Different races, different traditions. Something drew a huge range of people here in vast numbers.
They were Roman, they were Greek, they were Bedouin, they were Egyptians. They lived together at Bahriya Oasis. And they were buried together in this great golden cemetery.
What better place to hide the pagan lord than amongst this huge burial field of thousands of others, and anonymously so.
What drew people to this remote site? The answer may lie in this temple, the oldest structure on the site. And though its construction appears humble, its walls bear the image of antiquity's greatest warrior, the self-proclaimed pharaoh and god, Alexander.
This is Alexander the Great standing and holding some offering here in his hand. And we have here Ammon on the other side.
He claimed Amun as his father. The temple had become a center away from the great cities of Egypt for the cult that believed in Alexander's divine status.
And that's why the location of the Valley of the Golden Mummies was in front of the temple, because the people will come and enter inside the temple and give offering. And if you look, you can see the amount of pottery that exists. And this can give us an idea that the cult of Alexander the Great continues for a long time.
There is evidence to suggest that this site was a place of worship until 600 AD. Is it possible that people were still worshiping Alexander as a god?
When Egypt became Christian, there's no church in Bahrain. They may well have been using Alexander's age-old pagan temple as a kind of meeting place, a congregation place. This suggests that the early Greek Christians had a strange relationship with Alexander the Great.
There are many more mummies, perhaps thousands, unexamined, undiscovered beneath this landscape. It's impossible to rule out the idea that Alexander's body lies among them.
The only thing that I'm sure of, that the people who were buried here, they wanted to be near Alexander the Great.
The tomb of Alexander may never be found, but what has become clear is that he had more than one burial. It's somehow fitting for a man who held so many titles, played so many roles, and had so much power. Buried first in Memphis, probably in the Saqqara necropolis. It was certain that he was then transported to lie in the north in his Alexandrian tomb. He lay at the heart of the ancient world. It seems possible that even after the great empires fell, his cult endured, and his body remained in secret as an object of worship. Until that body is found, people will continue to search for it.
I think it would be spectacular to be able to find the man who changed the face of history. What he did for the world was just absolutely extraordinary.
Perhaps the tomb hunters are inching closer to their prize. The search continues unabated. 22 centuries after his death, Alexander the Great still wields irresistible power.
Alright, moving back on to our presentation. When we talk about Alexander's legacy, after he dies, a legacy is like what happens afterwards or what you leave behind. His empire is going to be divided into 3 pieces by his top generals. You'll have Antigonus, who will take over the Greek and the Macedonians. Excuse me, sorry about that. He'll take over the Greeks and the Macedonians. You'll have Ptolemy. I know it says a P, but the P is silent. Ptolemy will take over Egypt. and Seleucus will take over most of the Persian Empire, later known as the Suklid Empire or Sukid Empire. Um, One thing you need to understand is that there will be this rise in Hellenistic culture. Um, as Alexander conquered, he took on and blended all the cultures together. So, what you need to understand is that he's going to um, blend the cultures. Like Alexander even adopted some of Persian cultures because he married Persian women. Um, and these mixings of cultures is going to lead to a new vibrant culture. Um, Hellenistic culture contained Egyptians, Greeks, Persians, and other Eastern cultures. Um, what's going to happen is that new languages will emerge. You'll have trade and cultural diversity. Remember that Alexandria is going to be located in Africa, and this is the cultural center during this time. It's also a center for commerce, money, banking, things like that. Um, and you need to understand that it's going to thrive because it has large harbors where it can trade. It's on the Nile River. Um, by 300 BC, the population is around 500,000 people. Um, it even contains like an international community of Greek officials, Jewish merchants, Egyptian priests, and they mingled with visitors from Africa, Asia, and Persia. When we talk about Alexandria, it's very beautiful. It's the trade culture of the world. Like I told you, there's 500,000 citizens by 300 BC. There's a museum which is dedicated to the muses, like the Greek goddesses of art and science. It also contained an observatory where you look at the stars and space. It also has a library, which is the first true research library. Another thing that you need to understand is that by 150 BCE, the Hellenistic world will be in a decline. A new city will be rising, and it's going to be called Rome. And it was growing and gaining strength. So through Rome, um, Greek style drama, architecture, sculpture, religion, and philosophy were preserved and eventually become the core of what the Western world. What you understand is that the Romans are very, very, very similar to the Greeks. And you will learn that in Unit 3 because we're going to talk extensively and do comparison and contrasting of Rome and Greece. Um, Please rewind, fast forward, pause, and do not forget that at the end of this, star any questions that you have or anything that you're cloudy on so that your teacher can discuss it with you. And this is your video on Alexander the Great. Thank you.